Auzubillahiminash-shaytanir-rajim. Bismillah-rahmanir-rahim. Today is the 3rd of the August, and last night I was in my room. Basically, I was observing the constitutional issues, and I just observed those issues that the pretext of the issues in the civil depictions, and when I just confront myself that the raising issues. Today we would be individual engaged to observe the time evaluations and the cost methods of the economy. When I just immersed myself in the public sector, and when I just observed the judicial insights, I was observing those issues by myself. Then I just confront with that self as well, that the battles of the public issues, that the public itself, the portraying to be the poor and the poverty is of mind. The factors of the poverty, I would be very glad to intellectually just raise myself as to the civil obedience factors. So, when just be the line of the perfect modules of the evaluations of the judicial insights, the central judicial insights, the civil issues of those females which are in the shelter homes. For instance, I would like to raise here a landmark judicial question that those females which were destined in the Darul Iman and the reciprocate areas of the shelter homes and houses in the Pakistan, and without having the parental affection and the proper guardian ad litem. I just consider this issue to be very civil in nature. That's the way I just try to frame the same in the constitutional limits of the Article 184 of the Constitution by myself after just reading the interpretation clauses while the Article 9 and 12 of the Kanun Shahadat Order 1984 applicable and enforced in the whole of the federal unions of the Pakistan. When I just deliberately, in the deliberation of the observation of all these civil obedience or disobedient individuals and the factors of the issues and the common issues of the rotation of the fabrication issues for those, the question is that the sui juris subjected females in the Pakistan. This is my favorite topic under the legal issue because of my central interest under the humanitarian observation under the Australian applied laws in the Pakistan and in the international courts of the modes of courts, Republicans, observations, fiscal, motivational one. When I just observe myself while just observing the confined areas of the central default positions of the Republicans, this is the prime social issue, civil issue one in the Pakistan that the central litigant in interest most oftenly they do not have the balance of convenience through the civil litigation while having the no reciprocated transaction of the legal constitutional interpretation as well. So the questions of the interpretation clauses in the central courts of the Pakistani, these questions should have been considered by them that the courts under the judicial dictations under the dictum of the same are in the obscure questions of the restoration order as well. So while just observing the civil issues throughout the decade, which is very primarily socially, molded in the public sector, which factors were observed by myself as to witness my own observation regarding the female's existence in the shelter homes is a very sorrowful thought which I just represent today during the month of the August. That the questions under the rotation of the civil fabrication transitional area and after just observing the confined area to the same subjected lines with having the no proper reconciled parental affection under the civil defection clauses. These questions, which I just whole night just interpret by myself, as to show cause the same reciprocate areas of the marginal areas of the civil transparent observations under the fiscal negation of the same subjected children under the defection clauses of the third party or second party into the reciprocate areas under the measurable transactions of the same children which are trying to live a life or lead a life in the ED center or in the other any sort of the orphanage centers, because I just observe the prime social issues of the same, that such children are trying to beat the odds beat the odds mean by that trying to evict the self eviction of the questions, but the solutions which should have been rendered to the same in the subject of lines of the civil obedience is a question of today as a matter of judicial grace as per my observation understanding as well. When I just observe the wills of the individuals, the registrar of the Lahore High Court and the individuals, the testifications and the ossifications of the same, after just observing all of these depictions of the facts of the individuals, the transparent, measurable, non-transitional areas of the reproductive disordered, non-measurable battles of the non-transitional type of the pretext of the litigation in the every court in the Pakistan is a question. When I just raise myself under the judicial observation by myself, then the question is that the prime social question, which I just observed, that the question should be restored under the question clauses, despite of all these issues, the factors of the hunger strikes and the poverty of the mind versus the poverty of the wisdom. When I just observe the poverty of the wisdom, this term is very proud, which I just invented last night, that the poverty of wisdom and the poverty of mind. When we multiply the both sectors, we come up with the next third thought, that not second thought, third thought, that the individuals under the minority of the third or second person always come in the majority of the sui juris of the third and second person as a matter of their sides. So when the in person capacity and the individual capacity and the personal individuals are trying to remix the transitional areas of the same, thereby the questions of the public sectors are the apparent rules of the negation sector as well. The transmissions under the malgroomed children in the guardian ad litem cases, I always reflect a cause of action in the Supreme Judicial Council as to just to represent a video linkage in the Supreme Judicial Council as to understand that the civil disobedient factors of the children malgroomed one and having no reciprocate areas of the extensions to the fiscal obligations under the multipolar uh, observation obstruction order as well. The civil defection clauses are very, mm, uh, you can say that annexed in every court of the judicial justice because of the incapacities of the person capacity. And when I just observe all these rotation in question of the obligation in interest of the Republicans, I'm a Republican. I always represent a cause of action on the behest of the Pakistan because I represent the central statute as well, the federal one, as per my legal research analyst report, where the legal research analyst reports applied section and applied articles, and the law is 22 2015. The federal statute in the Pakistan have extended all the statute which can represent a cause of action in the upper divisional coast narrative judgments applied one in the central limits of the Pakistan. When I just apply myself in the known adaptations of the civil laws, then I just observe the very quantum of the failures by myself. The fiscal narrative affirmative facts in the public sector is a thought which is not being reserved in the reaffirmations of the affirmative collateral collective interest of the coordinators of the governance applied one in the Pakistan, as per my observation, very deep one. When I just reflects my senses in the legal wisdom, which thought is the confinement of the refreshment of the basic areas of working, is a question of today and the month of the August, and we should celebrate that month in the concurrence. Despite of the working, we work and we just observe the battles of the administrative area. When I just observe that it is very easy to observe the issues under the mental health ordinance that a person is suffering from the issues. In when I just study the cases of the females, I am shocked. When I just observed the code of the criminal procedure by myself, I was shocked to observe that the code of the criminal procedure is an invention of the British Empire in the Pakistan, which always favors the females' negligence. This term should have been acknowledged by the females of the Pakistan, whether the females are feminist or non-feminist. I'm not of that opinion to observe that. I'm not a conservative sort of person. That's the way I just observe the issues of the Pakistanis, especially the females of the Pakistani, because I just want to the protective right standing order for the females of the Pakistan for their better interest, because I'm a Pakistani and I felt that the men dominance 75% have become redundant in order to provide the certified sort of the transitional areas of the expenses to the remainder groups of the females in the upper civil clauses of the same, in fact, as a matter of their guardian cases and the civil defection clauses as well. Thereby, when the central litigant in interest in the civil defection clauses in the prime social scenes in the civil codes has to rotation clauses for the remainder proportion of the females as an adjacent question of the same is an obscure scene in the public sector, as per my observation, which is very inclined to the constitutional article 199, whereof the article 184, the original jurisdiction of the Supreme Court should have been adhered and acknowledged by the remainder proportion of them or the same subject matter. When I just cross testified myself as to just observe the conditional barriers of the females, the education is the key to success. That is a social issue which is not being in the adjacent rules of the obedience of the Republicans. The education and the cost effective education, I always said that both differs a lot in the mediums of the same object lines in the civil discrepant measurable areas as well under the lineal descendant and the descendant area of the same object of discovery under the recovery of the economy. These were the areas and are the areas which are very differed in the every area of the observation of the same. When I just observe the public issues and when I just observe the certified and non-certified sort of the individuals in the electronic transaction ordinances applied in the extension of the same in the object lines of the recovery of the balance of inconvenience, these 2 points should have been acknowledged by the Republicans, that what does it take, that what is the balance of convenience versus the balance of inconvenience. The balance of inconvenience means that a person is trying to cheat every sort of sector, and the balance of convenience means that he is providing or she is providing the sufficient sources to the other sort of individuals or the institutions. And the question, when I just observe the balance of inconvenience in the output values in the every transitional areas, then in the state institutions, I just figure it out the federal statute by myself as to just expansion of my time. The rotation of the known or the known working empowerment groups in the Pakistan in the labor code we the Pakistanis are very observant in that question as well, that when a person is suffering from an issue, that he or she is always objected and subjected in the labor court as a obscure question of the restoration of the recovery of the remaining areas of the land revenue or the workforce revenue. I just observed the question though. The remainder proportion of the land revenue is not an object line which is not in the restoration order. The females are somehow trying to convince under the 113th reproductive growth rate, and the males are trying to beat the odds with the same subject line, and after that selling off the denial to the reality. The virtual legal observation by the advocate Gulraiz King, the advanced comparative constitutional advocate itself by the federal statute, the concurrent applied statutes. Therefore, when I just observe the issues of the feminist groups in the Pakistan, because I have to be very liberal as to legally observe the issues of the feminist females, that the why the Pakistani females are becoming feminist because of observation of the non-restoration orders of the compilations of the fiscal motivational observation of the same in the permanent livings of the same females from the decade of the retroactive ruled out governance in the Pakistan. Those females are in the positions to become an arrogant feminist. And then the question is in the same obscure scenes of the transitional sorts of the families victimization as well as per my observations during the month of the August and year 2022 as per my conference standing order. Thereafter, when we just observe the retroactive political orders of the political defamation ordinances as well, then I just confront and obligate myself that the central litigant in interest, they have raised their female under the poverty, and those children are in the defection clauses. And the same defection clauses, children are trying to beat the drums of the affirmative facts of the methods of the compilations of the incomes and expenses of their own during the surrender deeds. When I just try to observe that what is the method and why the person is trying to surrender deeds. The question of the surrender deeds and the digital documentation is an object question, and that is a civil question. And when a person, the individuals are in the non-practical sanctions, and the same subject lines are trying to have the questions of the bureaucracy, non-observations of the obscure scenes. This is not a measurable area. When a person is trying to convince you by providing you every sort of sector, thereby which were the factors which led you into the consideration of the legal defection clauses, is an absurd thought that should have been compiled. But alas, we are not in the mood to observe the civil defection clauses. The Pakistani, we are in the mood to observe the civil negligence of the second party, first party, third party, but not oversee or to counter or to counterfeit our issues in the public issues thereof. When I just observe myself that the question of the humanitarian negligence operative one in the shelter homes regarding the rights of the females, after that the those females will become automated feminist because of the concurrent of or the permanent tools of the observations of the humanitarian men dominant disordered deceased areas of living with the same adjacent creeps. You can assume that as well, because I'm not taking the 25% males as a creep, but the 75% of them, because as to my humanitarian observation, that is my personal advanced opinion judgment as well. And when it comes to understand that the females of the Pakistan adjacent to their religious depiction of the wrong declaration of their holds still in the existence factual non-virtual reality as well. Thereby, the foreign employment issues in the Pakistan is a second disease. The non-service in the Pakistan is a first disease. Every person wants to have the foreign possession, but despite of working and reproducing females in the Pakistan, having a multiple documentation from the Pakistan, in the Pakistan, possession in the Pakistan, living outside the Pakistan, extending its duties outside the Pakistan, having every sort of property, in Pakistan is a question which is very alarming as per my judicial obligation. What is a joke with the Pakistanis that every politician or the other individual is trying to beat the Pakistan from having the theft of the property from the Pakistan and not trying to live in the Pakistan with the perfection moderate thought of observation of the sectors of the industrial rules, regulations. The retroactive concurrence is not a question. The question is that the prerogative of the governance applied one is there, but the governance and the government applied areas of the non observation of the same is a question which is not in the line and length and control of the depiction of the concept of the same. I just observe these factors by myself. So, the areas with the sorrowful heart of mine, I just observed that the concept of the multiple females reproductive values. I'm not saying that those females are not females. Those females are females, but the males of the same are the out of the values, and those males are trying to have the. I'm just so confused that they have overvalued, overcharged their females, and their males are trying to convince the same in the equital rate of the economy betrayal ratio as well. Set aside that issue, but we should observe the second question and the observation of mine in the rest of the same. When the rest of the individuals are trying to have the narrative of native observation of the same, then what is the cost over production area? We should be very observant with the same. When I just observe in the universities, in the colleges, in the areas of the local residential premises, that the status quo and the permanent status declarant of the same is a question which is not is the opposition lines of the same, and the top official mandate is not in the positions to observe the secondary and primary one, because the ipsit dixit culture in Pakistan is prevailing. Ipsit dixit is a term, Latin term, that is legal term and applied in the whole of the globe, that the Pakistanis are trying to convince themselves that they are trying to convince the equator rate in the economy. The concept of the equator rate in the economy is a concept which is not invisible to anyone, either of us, that whenever we just observe the refreshment of the civil tranquilities under the tranquilizers of the extraterrestrial narrative facts of the non obligations under the obligatory matters of the judgments in the retroactive ruled out principles. When I just observe these issues, thereafter, what were the prime social issues which targeted in the Republican sector is a concept. When I just observe the all laws, all civil issues by myself under my line and length of civil control, thereafter I just observe that in the Pakistan, the men dominant society and the females and the males both are not predominant. The schooling, the colleges, the universities, those areas of the non-transitional sort of the education just let the children into defection clauses. The guardian ad litem cases in the Pakistan and the defeated guardian cases in the Pakistan, and the extortion of children in the name of the abortion of fetus is a question, and the over a relocation of the embezzlement of the female's reproductive growth ratio is a problem. The overvalued multiple charges of the females is a question. The concept of the karukari and syakari under the pretext of either religion is a question. The concept of ultimate criminal misappropriation scenes with the females within the pretext of the official mandate is a question. The principal criminal debtor under the head charge of the principal criminal scenes of the females of wrong sides with the positive elimination factor is a question. Thereafter, the concept of the narrative judgment applied one in the Lahore High Court and the subordinate high courts and the Supreme Courts, we should have been very clear under the declarant rules of us that the females and the males both are today are posing as aliens to the matter facts of the civil obedience factor of the same in the negligence in the civil observation under the fiscal narrative observation of the same object lines under the civil decaying position as well. Astonished always to observe these factors by myself as I just confront that the questions which are not in the defeat lines of the negligent driven individuals in the Pakistan, and thereby the concept of the admirable declarant suit of the same is an object seen. Thereof, I just observe these issues. Thereby, the concept of the continuous points of the continuity of the dissolved transitional area, the acquisition of the pretext of the challenges, the non observations of the rights, the equity battles, the equity non empowered positions, the transitional reverse gear of the economy, the permanent observations of the intellectuals in the wrong depictions of the facts, and the wrong depiction of the facts in the narrative observation is a question which is not being adjacent to either of us today during the month of the August. Thereafter, when I just oversee those all issues by myself as to rotating my own eyes, I just observe the lies of the constructive obligations of the obligated civil individuals that they are not in the positions to observe the question of their purpose of living over the surface of the earth as well. The concept of the same is a objected area, which I just observed that they just oversee those issues which are not in the positions to be cast in the public sector as a prime social issue. This is my area of working. The point of the area of rotation of the civil obedience should have been declarant by the guardian ad litem, the de facto guardian, the subordinate ad valorem court fees is not a question. The question is that whether those females were objected with the civil defection clauses by the parental negligence official capacities or in the private official capacities, or either the concept of the observation of those females in the permanent concurrence of the negligence driven rights of the same operative lines of subjected cost negated permanent judgments of the family suits. The family suits are not in the declaration of the same as to observation of the rights of the humanitarian negligence. I just oversee those concept of myth. Thereafter, the concealment of the thought is a question of the public humanitarian observation as well. Then I come up with the next thought by myself after just observation all night the family suit issues under my judicial side stat. The pretext of overvaluation of the cost negation transaction as well is a question which should have been adjacent to the question of humanitarian observation by myself. So when I just observe all of these surrendered questions in the public sector, through the public, in the public, and after not having the revocation of the observation in an inclined pretext of the observation lines of the pretext of the internal targets of the humans, thereafter I just concept a question that the laws are very declarant and the individuals are very opposite to the quite managerial area of the same. And thereafter, today is the 3rd of the August, say blessed. This is the advanced comparative constitutional educate itself, and all copyrights are reserved with the same.